Hey, this is Jamey with Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to delve into a topic that isn't really a top 10 list or anything like that. It's going to be a little different than some of the other videos I've done recently, because I'm going to talk about accessibility in games. Games that offer great accessibility to a wide range of players and during the gameplay itself, and some games that I'm going to use some games as examples of less than ideal accessibility. I don't mean to pick on these games. These are actually games that I rather enjoy quite a bit, and even one of mine will be in here. Um, but I just thought it would be interesting to delve into the topic of accessibility from a few different angles, and I'm sure you'll have some great additions in the comments. I really look forward to hearing your thoughts and being a part of that conversation. So this is going to jump all around a little bit. I have kind of a list of various topics. The first one that I have on my list, and this will kind of set a precedent for the type of accessibility I'm talking about, is one thing I've noticed in games, one kind of thing that makes games, I think, a little bit less accessible, in my opinion, is are games that have things that you need to see from across the table, things that you need to read specifically from across the table. I think that can limit the accessibility of the game a little bit. It can mean that if I'm sitting on one end of the table and there's a card upside down on the other end of the table with 4 lines of text on it, I may just ignore that card. It's going to be really hard for me to actually value that card in any way. I think that makes it a little bit tricky. I think that can make the game a little less a little less accessible. Now, in one of our games, we have Wingspan. Wingspan does have a tableau of 3 face-up cards on the middle of the table. And you'll notice in most of my games, I don't have face-up cards because of that. If the card just has icons, I'm more open to it. I think icons, you can make big icons that you can easily see from across the table, but especially if there's text, I generally avoid having those cards face up in my games. Wingspan, we kind of made an exception for that because you don't always need to read the text of the cards on the Birds of Wingspan to decide whether or not you want them in your hand. Because of the bonus cards you have, because of the goals on the table, there might be other reasons that you can use icons to guide you as to whether or not you want those cards. But just in case, we included this plastic tray in Wingspan. Sorry, I don't have it in front of me right now, but there's a plastic tray that you put those cards on, and the plastic tray is designed so it's easy to really pick up those cards, or you can just pick up the whole tray and pass it around the table when you need to. So we've taken something that might be considered inaccessible and made it as accessible as possible for those who really want to read those cards before making a choice about them. Related to this, I'm actually going to mention a few of our games today, actually, now that I'm talking about this. Another one of these is games with text and icons that are too small for players to see. I'm fortunate. I have 20/20 vision, but a lot of people don't. And a lot of people, I think as I get older, I'm sure my vision will continue to get worse and worse over the years until maybe someday I have to wear glasses. But a lot of people have a hard time seeing really small icons and text. And for me as a designer, it's only been the last few years that I've really been aware of this. It particularly came to light with Between Two Castles of Mad King Ludwig, which from my perspective, had icons that were plenty big enough for players to see and read. And I was so used to playing the game that I really actually had to even look at the icons. But I heard a lot of feedback from players saying, these icons and this text, it's just a little too small. It hurts my eyes to look at this, especially when I have these tiles out on the table. After I've actually built my castle, they're out on the table, and I'm trying to look at these different icons. And I can empathize with that now, now that I've heard and that I understand it. So it's something that I often look for now when I design a game, or when I'm publishing a game. I want to make sure that text, especially if it's something that is going to be flat on the table as opposed to a card in your hand that you can put really close to your face. I want to make sure that text and those icons are big enough for players of different types of vision to be able to see. The next example I have are that can make a game a little less accessible are games that don't make it easy for people with colorblindness issues to determine the difference between the components. So for example, if you have a game with a bunch of player cubes and those cubes are going to interact with each other on the same space on the board, opposed to just being in your own personal supply, since they're all cubes, they're all the same shape. If they have colors that are not even similar to each other, but might conflict with each other in terms of different types of color blindness, it might be really hard for certain players to tell the difference between those cubes. We have someone with a type of color blindness in our group, and he has a really hard time with red and green, which is, I think, the most common type. So one way to counter this is to use different shapes. So instead of giving each player a cube, I might have triangles, and you might have hexagons, you might have circles, things like that. So we can have different shapes at least, as well as different colors. Because for many other people, for really the majority of people, the colors are very, very helpful to see the difference between the tokens. The other thing that I would recommend is using an app called Colorblind Pal. I think it's either Colorblind Pal or Color Pal. And you can, I use this app to look at different tokens that we're making through the lens of this app, through the lens of different types of colorblindness, so that I can pick colors in games. If I do ever have components that need to be very similar to one another, so I can pick colors that are easily differentiated for people with different types of colorblindness. So that, I think, can make the games more accessible to a certain population of people that would otherwise have a hard time with them. That actually reminds me of another category that I didn't originally have on this list, which are solo games. There's a decent number of gamers. From my calculations, it's somewhere between like 3 and 10%. It's hard to tell depending on who you're polling. Between 3 and 10% of people only play games solo, or primarily play games solo. And so if your game doesn't offer solo play, if it only plays for like 2 and up or 3 and up players, then you're excluding like a decent amount of the audience. Now, not every game can be played solo or should be played solo. I think there are certain games like bluffing games. If you're playing, it would be tough to play coup solo, for example. Probably impossible. But a lot of games can actually have a decent solo variant. At Stonemaier Games, we use something called Automa. There's a company that I work with, run by a guy named Morton, who makes intelligent opponents for the purpose of solo play. And so that way we get to make our games more accessible to a huge, well, not a huge portion, but a decent portion of the gaming audience who would otherwise not be interested in playing the games. Another example here of accessibility considerations are games that have just too many icons. I am probably guilty of this in several of my games, but I think the biggest the time where I see this the most are games where there are icons and no text at all to help describe them. An example of this is, I'll give it to Seven Wonders. So Seven Wonders is a game I love, but it does have a ton of icons in it, especially when you get to the leaders expansion. We always have to look up what those leaders mean. And the publisher has done this to make the cards language independent so that you don't need text on them. But I found that it's really, really helpful to have both on the cards. An example of this is Deus. On Deus, in the cards in Deus, you have the icons, but you also have text describing them. So once you get to know what the icons mean, you can just read it on the card. But before then, you can read the text, which is very, very helpful. Another kind of example of this is in Kemet, another game that I really, really love, but none of the abilities, the text are written on the tiles themselves, which I actually think is probably the right decision for Kemet. There are a bunch of tiles with unique abilities in Kemet, and they don't have text on them, which I think is fine. But Kemet only comes with one little booklet that describes all that text that you pass around the table. Kemet could be more accessible, I think, if more than one booklet were provided in the book. This is something I took into consideration with Tapestry, and it's the reason I provided 2 reference guides instead of just one in Tapestry. They're identical, they're easy to pass around the table. It's not thin paper either in Tapestry, so that it's very sturdy cardstock, so it holds up well. You can pass it around the table, or just keep one on either side of the table. Another one on my list is the ability to pick up cardboard and wooden tokens. So I bet you've encountered a game that has cardboard tokens that are so thin that you can't actually pick them up, or they're very difficult to pick up. That can be really annoying. Also kind of related to this are cards. Sometimes you have a game where you're putting cards on cardboard, and cards are fairly difficult to pick up off of cardboard. I'm sure you've experienced that, where you're trying to get your fingernail under the card to pick it up, but you can't quite get it. So it's nice when you have cards that need to be picked up off a surface to either have them near the edge of a board, so you can just slide them right off, or use a neoprene mat instead of a cardboard board, because then neoprene mats make it really easy to press down and get a little leverage under the card to make it easier to pick up. I also mentioned wooden tokens here. And what I'm referring to here are in games where wooden tokens are stacked on top of one another and need to be unstacked for the purpose of scoring. So if you have like 3 cylinders, one for each player, they count as like the VP markers in the game. And you're constantly having to like unstack yours to get to the one beneath it, or unstack those on top of yours to get to the ones beneath it. I think that doesn't make the game truly less accessible. I don't think someone would stop playing the game because of that. But I think it's a little fiddly thing that could be eliminated from a game to make it a little bit more friendly. Kind of along those lines of something that's convenient to have but not necessary, but can make a game a little bit more accessible, is exactly how you shrink wrap cards, decks of cards, when you package the game. So Panda, the manufacturer that I use, they used to not do this, and I really, really pushed them to do that, and they finally started doing it, which is sometimes they used to shrink wrap cards without the little strip of plastic that you can pull away from the card to unwrap it. But for most decks of cards, they're able to do that now. There's a machine that does it for certain sizes of cards and certain sizes of decks of cards. Because I used to be really frustrated when I'd get samples of our games and it was just very difficult to get into that shrink wrap to open the deck in the first place. So like it was physically inaccessible to get into that pack of cards. The downside, of course, is the environmental impact of that shrink wrap, and we are working on another solution for that. But for now, we do like those little plastic strips on there. So there's another one for one of our games. The original, and I do have the example for this, the original version of Tuscany, the extended board in the game, we put this gloss on it that we thought would be good for the game to have it be a little glossy, so that because it protects the surface of the board against spills and things like that. It would make the board it would extend the longevity of the extended board. However, the downside there is that if you're playing in a brightly lit room, the glare from either natural light or other lights can make it really difficult to actually read the board. So it makes the board inaccessible if it's too glossy. So I highly recommend, and I've learned, and I changed the Tuscany board to be a matte type style printing rather than a glossy printing, which really diffuses the glare and makes the board easy to see from different angles, no matter what the lighting is that you use. So this goes back to the idea of seeing things from across the table. And it's kind of a weird one, but I was playing Bunny Kingdom with the expansion a few months ago, and really lovely game. I love Bunny Kingdom, but the expansion board was pretty significant, pretty big, and from across the table, I really couldn't even see what was going on that board. And again, I have good eyesight, so I can usually see things, but I think it was a combination of maybe it was a gloss board, and just the shape of it just made it was so far away from where I was sitting based on the table. There was a lot of stuff on the table. There was another board in the way, the main board, that I couldn't see what was going on that board. So I think just this recommendation for me to offer to designers, and something that I try to keep in mind, is when I put the pre-production copy of one of our games on the table, or when I'm thinking about what that copy will be, I try to sit at different positions on the table, and I look at the board or the boards, and try to put myself literally in the shoes of players sitting around the table from different angles to see, does that icon make sense upside down? Can I see this other board over here? Or any pieces blocking my view of other things on the board? I found that to be really helpful to make games more accessible no matter where you're sitting at the table. Okay, so one in reference to rulebooks. So I found that there are certain games where I am hesitant to get them to the table, making them less accessible, because I know I'm going to have to reference the rulebook constantly throughout the game. Perhaps you've encountered a game like this where maybe there are a lot of exceptions in the rules, or a lot of little fiddly things, maybe even during setup. Like setup just isn't intuitive on the board, so every time you play, you have to pull out those setup rules. That can really get in the way of how often I get the game to the table, which to me is all about accessibility. A game is accessible if it's easy to get to the table and easy to get people to play it with me. So if it's a game with a lot of weird little fiddly exceptions, maybe with a really long rule book, things that aren't explained in the interface of the game itself, that to me can make a game less accessible. And I think the positive converse of that are games that do have interfaces that explain everything really intuitively in the context of the game itself. They don't require you to go to the rulebook to look anything up. Okay, so here's another example related to one of the best-selling games of all time, Catan. Games that force you to make a choice before the game begins. Now, I do this in a few of my games, but I try to make it an inconsequential decision. Basically, no matter what decision you make at that point in the game, you can still win the game, no matter what that choice is. And the reason I focus on this in my designs is that I know that when people play my games, odds are that there's going to be someone learning it for the first time. And I think that's the case for many games. Maybe not Catan anymore, because so many people know how to play this. But I think for a lot of games, people are playing it for the first time. And so forcing players to make a really, really crucial decision before the game even begins can impact the accessibility of the game. And so I think of Catan because one of the most important choices you make in Catan is during initial setup, when you're deciding where to put your settlements at the beginning of the game. That's a huge decision to make, and Catan requires you to do that if you're learning the game, before you even understand how the game works. So to me, that is a type of accessibility issue that I would like to avoid in general in my games and games that I play in general. I think maybe, yeah. The other thing that's kind of like this, also related to setup, are games that require very complex setup, where you're sorting through cards, you're searching through cards to get certain things, or searching through different components, where the setup varies based on player count or like the time of day, that all these different requirements that go into how the setup is different this game from last game. And the biggest perpetrator of this are the Legendary series of games. I love this series of games. I love this game in particular. I really, really love Legendary Counters. But multiple times over the last few months, I've tried to get to the table, and I just cannot get past the setup for it. And this is a game that I've played. I haven't ever set it up. Another friend has often set it up. But the setup is just such a hassle. It's really difficult to go through the cards and find them. So I have found that to be a major accessibility issue for certain games that gets in the way of my ability to actually play them. Let's see. Oh, this is one. Yeah, I'm actually close to the end here. Language dependency on private and secret information. So usually cards. So when I play games, I often play face up. I put my cards just face up on the table and I play that way. That's personal preference. But there is value, I think, in considering offering that option to players, especially if you have language-dependent components. And the reason is, you might be playing with someone either in a different who isn't native to your language, or the language of the game, or they are too young to read the cards themselves. And so, if you have public information and those cards are just out on the table, then you can help that person at any given time. If they're saying, "Okay, I'm having difficulty understanding this card," you can just look at it because it's right on the table and help them out. Whereas if it's private information, if it's a private hand of cards, that you can't help the person out that way. So I try to, if I am going to have cards with text on them, I generally try to make them public information. Just put them face up on the table so that players can help each other when necessary. And sometimes maybe throughout the game for someone who's a little bit younger and can't read yet and needs that constant help. Rather than make that private information. And if I am going to have private information in the game, I try not to make it language dependent. I try to make it use very basic icons so players maybe don't need to be able to read that text. As I'm saying this, I'm thinking of Tapestry and how Tapestry does have a private hand of cards, but really they're just private because of the trap cards in Tapestry. Everything else could be public, but the traps are meant to be private. So you could easily ask anyone at any time, what does this card mean, as long as you're not revealing a trap. I'm sure there are many other accessibility issues, things that make it hard to get a game to the table, hard to share the game with others, hard to play the game with certain types of people, and games that might even exclude entire groups of people because of the types of accessibility they offer. And actually, even as I say that, I think of games that maybe haven't taken different cultures and genders and diversity into the aesthetic of the game. Maybe it's a game that only has male characters, no females, or it's a game that only has a certain race or something where it's kind of pigeonholed into one category when it could just easily show a diversity of people. Thematically, I understand that there's certain themes that don't make sense to have that type of diversity. I don't like if you designed a game about a planet where there were only men on that planet, then it may not make sense to put women in that game, or vice versa, planet of women. That's an extreme example. But I think sometimes if you have a game with such limited diversity, I think that can make it a little harder for people to relate to it, and to people want to see. Well, I don't want to generalize. I think sometimes people want to see themselves in games, and sometimes people want to see the opposite of themselves in games. So I think the diversity works both ways there, to make games more accessible to a larger number of people. So I'm just touching upon like the types of accessibility that you can find in games. I'm also just rambling here, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts on games that you've encountered that are just not accessible to you, that you found that you just can't get to the table, or you don't want to get to the table, or you want to, but you have a hard time doing so because of this one thing. I'd love to hear your thoughts about that in the comments, or anything related to what I've talked about today. If you have any examples, or if you want to contradict what I've said, I'm totally open to that, as long as you do it respectfully. I'd love to hear your thoughts about accessibility in the comments. Obviously, it's something that I think about a lot for our games, and I want our games to be even more accessible than they are. So I think this is going to be great feedback for me to hear for Stonemaier games. All right, thanks. That's my Sunday sit down. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments.